expert witness.
And in what courts, Mr. Bello?
I've testified in state courts in Miami-Dade County, also Broward County, and the federal courts also of Miami-Dade and Broward County.
Okay. And prior employments, where did you work before you worked in the Broward Sheriff's Crime Lab?
I was employed at Miami-Dade Police Department, and I was there for 7 years as a fireman tool mark examiner.
Okay. And then you're now the head of the department with the Broward Sheriff's Office?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I'd like to show you now Stacy's exhibit 27. And ask you, Mr. Bello, this is May 6th. You probably know that, so take a look at that. Okay. Have you seen that before?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And what did you do with that when you received it?
So this is a firearm that I operated during the examination of this case. I checked the safeties of the firearm. I checked the trigger pull of the firearm. I checked the overall safety of it, the condition, whether or not it would be safe to fire. And then ultimately I produced test fires for the comparison in this case.
Okay. What is that?
This is a Smith & Wesson model M&P 15. So it's a rifle manufactured by Smith & Wesson.
Okay. And people commonly call it an AR-15. Why is that?
So it's an AR style firearm. The AR style firearm is just an Armalite rifle that was designed for military purposes. And so this is a personal use or a civilian use version of that, in that it's semi-automatic, so it's not like the original M16s that were manufactured for the military. But the design of it is still the same. The receiver, the buttstock, the foregrips, they're all the same design as the original AR-15s.
Okay. And what caliber of rifle is that?
This one is a 5.56 NATO caliber rifle. 5.56 NATO is a synonym for 223. So it will chamber both 5.56 and 223. The 5.56 NATO cartridges are faster cartridges. They have more powder inside of the cartridge itself. So it's not recommended that you chamber a 5.56 into a 223 firearm, but because this one is a 5.56 firearm, you can do both interchangeably.
Okay, so that weapon, Stacy Exhibit 270, fires both 5.56 and .223s?
Correct.
Okay. And how does it operate?
May I approach Drew to show it?
You need to step down to show?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. So I'm not going to unstrap the firearm. I'm going to leave it strapped in. There is no magazine in the firearm, so there's no ammunition. I don't have any ammunition on me. The way that you would operate this firearm is you would load a magazine. It's a detachable magazine. It's inserted into the magazine well. So once the magazine is entered, the bolt of the firearm is retracted and dropped. If it's not already in the rearmost position, in which case it can just be dropped. At that point, the firearm will be ready to fire with one cartridge inside of the chamber, and the remaining cartridges are inside of the magazine. You can then pull the trigger. It'll discharge a round that's inside of the firearm, loading another one, and the casing will end up somewhere to the right and rear of where I would be standing. So that's essentially how you would function this. And it will fire one cartridge case every time you pull the trigger until the magazine is empty, or unless you have a jam. So if the firearm jams, then you have to clear the jam and then begin the process all over.
Okay. And what is the purpose of the bipod? You want to show us what the bipod is?
So the bipod he's referring to is this piece right here. What that does is it allows a shooter to stabilize his shots. So if you rest the bipod onto a solid surface, you can then use your arm and pull the firearm into your shoulder without necessarily having a second hand on the forearm of the firearm. And so your shots are much more stable from a solid surface on this bipod than they would be just using your hands.
Okay. And the forward vertical grip, what's the purpose of that?
The vertical grip is this part right here. And so that is another stabilizing feature. It's more comfortable for somebody who's shooting to have a vertical grip as opposed to cradling the firearm in their hands. You also have a better grip on this than you would on just the frame of the firearm itself. And so The grip is basically stabilize your shots as you're firing.
Okay, you can have a seat. So, when you examined that weapon, Mr. Bello, what was added on to the weapon after purchase?
So when Smith & Wesson manufactures a few different versions, or they sell a few different versions of the M&P 15, the standard version does not come with this rail plate or the bipod, the vertical grip, or the backpack strap. So those would all be add-on items that were not manufactured with this firearm.
Okay. And did you test the trigger pull of that weapon?
I did.
What is a trigger pull?
The trigger pull of this firearm is approximately 5 pounds. What that means essentially is that it takes 5 pounds of pressure from your index finger or shooting finger in order to discharge the firearm itself.
Okay. Take that from you. I want to show you Mr. Bello, state's exhibits. Mark 275, that has been previously identified by Detective Crespo as being the magazine that was in State's Exhibit 270, the rifle that you just explained the operation to us.
Yes, that's correct.
Have you looked at that magazine?
I have.
Okay, what is that?
So this is a 30-round magazine designed for an AR-15 type rifle. So any AR-15 type rifle will accept this, or rather, AR-15 type rifle or pistol will accept this magazine. It's designed to hold 30 rounds. The reason I say it's designed to hold 30 rounds is that if I'm loading the firearm, I might be able to squeeze another round in there, versus if my wife was loading the firearm, maybe she can't squeeze the extra round. So it's designed, the manufacturer says put 30 rounds in it. Sometimes it can hold a little bit more, sometimes it holds a little less.
And what type of ammunition would can be placed into that magazine?
This can hold either 5.56 or 223 ammunition, either way.
Okay. Showing you now State's Exhibit 271. It's been identified as the cartridge removed from the chamber of 270. What is that?
So this is a live cartridge. It is a 5.56 cartridge manufactured by Lake City, and it's a full metal jacket cartridge.
And you examined that?
I did.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 272 that's previously identified as being in the magazine, it's been identified as State's Exhibit 275.
So these are other live ammunition that were submitted with the firearm. The key difference, I guess, in some of these ammunitions is that they have the NATO designation for tracer rounds, the orange tips. So NATO actually has different designations for their ammunition, and they will band the tips of their ammunition with different colors, and those colors signify different things. So in this case, this orange tip on this ammunition indicates that it's a tracer round, or they are tracer rounds.
What is a tracer round?
So a tracer round is a type of round which the bullet is essentially the same as any standard bullet. However, in the base of the projectile, there is a small amount of incendiary. And so what that's meant to do is that when you're firing, that incendiary will be ignited by the powder that's inside of the cartridge during firing, and allowing the shooter to see where that projectile is traveling, especially if it's in the dark.
Okay. And how many tracer rounds were in that exhibit?
11.
Okay. Are they all 5.56s?
They are.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you know how many 5.56 and how many 223s were in that exhibit?
One moment, I can look at my report. I don't recall exactly how many were in this particular exhibit.
Well, there were 23 in there, right?
Correct, and it looks like 3 of them are 223s, and the remaining are 556.
Okay. Now I want to show you Stacy Exhibit Mark 300 that has been identified by Detective Crespo as a rail cover found on the 3rd floor of the 1200 building. Have you examined that?
I have.
And did you examine it with reference to Stacy Exhibit 270, which is the 5.56 rifle you explained to us?
I did.
And what did you discover?
That this seems to be the matching rail cover for the rail cover that's currently on the firearm. So it seems like it must have come dislodged during the event.
Okay. And show you State Exhibit 196. It is a live round found by Detective Christian in a backpack on the 1st floor of the 1200 building outside of classroom 1216. Have you examined that?
Yes.
What is that?
This is a live 556 cartridge, full metal jacket, manufactured by Lake City. So again, another cartridge that could have been fired to that firearm.
Okay. And I'm going to show you State Exhibit 266, which has been identified as 2 fired casings found in the west stairwell on the 1st floor of the 1200 building. Have you examined that?
Yes, I did.
And what type of examination did you do?
So because these were casings, these require microscopic examination in comparison to the test fires produced by the firearm. And so I took these 2 casings and using the casings and test fires from the firearm, I put them under the microscope and determined that these 2 casings were fired from the submitted firearm.
And how do you do that? How do you make that determination?
So the characteristics that are present, the individual characteristics that are present, so those are accidental in nature. They're not intended by the manufacturer. They're not reproducible by the manufacturer. So what that means is basically that every firearm that comes off of their assembly line will be different. And we've done validation studies to determine that even if we pull 10 firearms consecutively off of their assembly lines, we could still distinguish firearm 1 from 2, from 3, from 4, and from each other. And so using the comparison microscope and taking photographs and looking at the pictures and looking at the actual live images under the microscope, I determined that there were sufficient individual characteristics present for a comparison, and the agreement between the 2, the test fires and the evidence casings was sufficient to say that there was an identification. So they did come from the same firearm.
And TF 16214 that's been in evidence, the rifle?
Correct, the rifle,
okay.
yes.
Stacy Exhibit 270, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I want to show you now the following exhibits that have been identified by Detective
The
Christian.
defense will stipulate that every casing, everything on that table came from or was associated with that firearm that was used to commit these crimes for which Mr. Cruz has already pled guilty.
That's fine, but there are other details that the jury has to hear that she doesn't know what she's going to stipulate to. So I appreciate that, but I think we have to go through it.
Okay.
Okay, I want to show you now State's Exhibits 227, 228, 221, 222, 223, 224, 225, and 226. And Detective Bello, they all came from different quadrants of the 1st floor hallway. We have an opportunity to examine those 70 fired casings.
Yes, I have.
Okay, and what was your determination?
So my determination was that the 70 fire casings did come from the submitted firearm, in this case, the submitted rifle in the case. And that there were, again, a mixed match of 223 and 5.56 ammunition that was expended, but regardless, they all came from the firearm that was submitted in the case, the rifle.
Okay. And what were some of the manufacturers of those?
Sure. So there were several from Lake City. Lake City is a military manufacturer for firearms, for ammunition. And so LC is their head stamp, and they stamped the year that it was manufactured. So there were actually, Lake City had several different years of manufacture that were found in here. It's the same manufacturer, but different lot years that they were produced. There was El Dorado, there was some ammunition from Malaysia, there was Remington Peters, Federal Cartridge Case Company, and I think that's all of them that were on this particular floor.
Okay. Are you able to make a determination from looking at a fired cartridge casing whether it was a tracer round or not?
No, so I can't tell the difference between a cartridge case that held a tracer round and a cartridge case that did not hold a tracer round. If it was a Federal Cartridge Case Company, I would say probably not, because they manufacture for civilian use, and so tracer rounds would not be something that's a civilian use purpose. However, any of the Lake City ammunition could have had a tracer round loaded into it, and there's really not a way for me to tell whether it did or not without the projectile itself.
Okay, so you have to look at the entire bullet to
Correct.
determine if it was a tracer round. Okay.
That's correct.
All right, take this from you. Now I want to show you State's Exhibit marked 240 that has been identified by Detective Flores as fired cartridge casings found on the second floor of the 1200. You examined those?
I did.
And what's the result of your examination of those?
So these were, again, fire cartridge cases that were identified as having come from the submitted Smith & Wesson rifle. And there was a mix of ammunition, although most of these were 223.
Okay. And again, the difference between the 223 and the 5.56?
The 5.56 has more powder, and so the velocity of the projectile itself leaving the barrel is higher when using 5.56 ammunition versus 223 ammunition.
Okay. And what's the velocity of TF-162 firing a projectile out of there?
So the velocity for if a 223 is coming out of the weapon, typically it's around 3,000 feet per second. If a 5.56 is coming out of it, it can range, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,200 feet per second to 4,000 feet per second.
Okay. And how about an average handgun, semi-automatic handgun? What's the velocity?
So something like a 9mm firearm is going to have a velocity somewhere around 1,000 to 1,500 feet per second.
Okay. Okay, let me take Stacy. And now I'm going to show you State's exhibits. .318, .319, .320, .321, .322, .323. These have been previously identified as fired casings by Detective Crespo, found on the third floor.
Yes, I did examine these.
Okay, and what was your determination?
All of the submitted casings from the third floor were identified as having been fired by the submitted Smith & Wesson rifle. There was, again, a mix of manufacturers involved in these casings, and there was also a mix of 223 and 556, although the majority of the casings on the third floor were 556.
Okay, and were there any different manufacturers of those cartridge casings?
Yes, there were several different manufacturers. Again, Lake City was one of the major manufacturers that was present. El Dorado Federal Cartridge Company was found there as well. There were some Remington. I believe that's it as far as manufacturers. So I believe it's 4 different manufacturers on the third floor.
All right, did you make a list of all the manufacturers of all the fired cartridge casings found on the first floor, second floor, the west stairwell, and on the third floor?
Yes.
And what were the manufacturers?
So there was Lake City, El Dorado, Federal Cartridge Company, Remington, Malaysia, Winchester Military Ammunition, and again, Lake City, there was at least 3 different years of manufacture for that, so those would be different lot numbers, if you will, from Lake City.
Okay, okay. And now showing you State's Exhibit Mark 314 and 315. And these 2 exhibits have been identified by Detective Crespo as coming from the 1240, Teacher's Lounge 1240, on the third floor of the 1200 building, and 1240A1, an adjoining room to the Teacher's Lounge 1240. Have you examined those?
I have.
And what was your determination?
That all of these submitted cartridge cases were fired from the Smith & Wesson rifle that was submitted in this case.
Did you go into, ever have an occasion to go into the Teacher's Lounge 1240 on the third floor of the 1200 building at Marjory, Stoneman, Douglas?
I did.
And what did you observe?
So I observed that in that particular room there was 2 areas where that in the windows that contained close gunfire, in the sense that the actual range of the shots through the windows were tightly grouped. So that indicates that the muzzle of the firearm was probably relatively close to the window, because if you're discharging this firearm rapidly from a distance, the firearm tends to rise. And so the grouping is not going to be a real tight grouping around the window. It would be more dispersed. So it looks like the shots were fairly close to that window, or to both windows.
Okay. Showing you now. State's Exhibit 195. And this exhibit has been identified by Detective Christian as 3 magazines coming from the first floor of the 1200. Mr. Bello, you can take a look at those magazines.
Yes, I did.
Okay, what are you able to tell us about those 3 magazines?
So 2 of the magazines are 30-round magazines, and then the final black magazine in the package is a 10-round magazine.
Okay, and there were 9 live rounds in one of those exhibits, and it was
Correct.
one of those magazines. And what were you able to determine?
That the cartridges themselves are full metal jacketed cartridges, manufactured by a mix of manufacturers. Again, some of them are from Remington, some of them are from Lake City. So there's a mix of 223 and 556 ammunition again in the magazine.
Okay. And I want to show you Stacy Exhibit 317. It's been identified by Detective Crespo as coming from the third floor hallway of the 1200 building. What is that?
So this one is a 40-round magazine, manufactured for 5.56 and 223 caliber ammunition.
Okay. And Stacy Exhibit 316 has been identified by Detective Crespo as coming from the Teacher's Lounge 1240 on the third floor of the 1200 building.
Yeah, this is another 40-round magazine, manufactured to hold 5.56 and 223 caliber ammunition.
Okay. And now I want to show you have you ever weighed with a full 40-round magazine and a 30-round magazine weighs?
I have.
Okay, I want to show you now Stacy Exhibit 280, Stacy Exhibit 276, Stacy Exhibit 277, Stacy Exhibit 279, and States Exhibit 278. These 5 magazines have been testified that they came from a black vest found on the third floor stairwell by Detective Crespo.
Okay.
Okay, have you examined those exhibits?
I have.
Okay. And you said you have weighed a fully loaded 40-round magazine?
Yes.
Approximately how much does that weigh?
It weighs approximately 1.5 pounds.
And how about a 30-round fully loaded magazine?
It's roughly 1.1 pounds.
Okay. So those 5 magazines, what were you able to, and those projectiles within the magazines, what were you able to determine?
So I believe this is a 30-round magazine, a second 30-round magazine. This is a third 30-round magazine. This one's a 40-round magazine. And another 30-round magazine. The ammunition, again, is a mix of ammunition of both 223 and 5.56, different manufacturers involved in all of the magazines. And one of the magazines in particular, looks like States Exhibit 277, contains several rounds of tracer ammunition as well.
All right, could you show us what a tracer round looks like?
Sure.
Your Honor, could you step down?
Sure.
So these are the tracer rounds that I'm mentioning with that orange tip on the rounds themselves. So you can see that a regular round doesn't have anything on the tip, and then the tracer rounds have a small band at the very tip of it that has that orange color to it. And again, the designations are different. They're NATO designations. So armor piercings will be black, incendiaries will be red, tracers are orange. So standard without it, and then the orange band.
And Mr. Bello, were you able to give us a total, or were you able to come up with a total of how many 5.56 live rounds you examined?
Yes. So it looks like 5.56 ammunition. There's a total of 204 live cartridges that were submitted. Of that, I believe 163 are 5.56, and then the remaining are 223.
Okay, and
on
how
the
about
live.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, what?
And how about the fired casings that you examined?
Yeah. The fired cartridge cases, 85 cartridge cases were 5.56, and 54 were 223.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bello. Your Honor, thank you. I have no further questions of Mr. Bello.
Okay, is there any questions from the defense?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, sir. You're excused.